The marriage of the Queen to the Duke of Edinburgh is the longest of a reigning monarch in British history. What began as a fairy tale romance has matured into a union lasting more than 60 years. It has survived public scrutiny and private misfortune, providing continuity for both their family and the nation during a period of unprecedented change in British history. But how did they meet? What brought them together? And to what do they owe their marital success?
Prince Philip is the only man who can treat the Queen as if she was a normal woman. Nobody else can.
It's been a challenge for us, but by trial and experience, I believe we have achieved a sensible division of labour and a good balance between our individual and joint interests.
At a lunch in honour of the Queen's golden wedding in 1997, Prince Philip gave his assessment of what made their marriage work.
The trouble is that no two marriages are quite alike. However, I think that the main lesson that we've learnt is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. It may not be quite so important when things are going well, but it is absolutely vital when things get difficult. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
It was a rare insight into the private life of Britain's first couple, who, when they married 50 years earlier, brought a little colour to the then drab life of the nation.
Well, everyone seemed to think that our wedding was a very happy occasion and brought a little colour back to life after the dreary war years. At any rate, we certainly thought so.
Excitement was at its peak as the King, the Queen, Queen Mary and other members of the royal family came out to join them.
Their romance had come to public attention not long after the end of the Second World War.
A guard of honour of ATS clerks, telephonists and cooks welcomed Princess Elizabeth to Sandhurst, a sign of the feminine influence at work in this one-time exclusively masculine establishment, which now houses a co-educational staff course.
By this time, Princess Elizabeth was a fully fledged working royal. She took on an increasing number of solo engagements, and in turn, the press and public took an intense interest in her character, her beauty, and her marriage prospects.
I think the Queen would have had very limited choice, and it would have been really from the circles of the aristocracy. I mean, unsuitable young men were paraded out, if you like. No, it would have been a very narrow circle.
As the royal yacht Victoria and Albert glides into the mouth of the River Dart, memories must be revived for His Majesty. For the King himself was a cadet at the Royal Naval College in the years before the Great War.
For the young princess, her heart was already set on the young man, nearly 5 years her senior, whom she'd met shortly before the outbreak of war, during a trip with her parents to the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth. Elizabeth was 13.
Later in the afternoon, each member of the royal family plants a tree in commemoration of this visit. The King a purple beech, the Queen a golden beech, Princess Elizabeth a white beam, and Princess Margaret a scarlet chestnut.
During the 2-day visit, a tea party was held on board the royal yacht Victoria and Albert. Attended by the royal family, it had been arranged by Lord Mountbatten, who had also invited his nephew and naval cadet, Prince Philip of Greece. It was the first significant encounter between the princess and the prince.
Mountbatten certainly played a part. He realised that Philip could be a possibility. Certainly, he was there in Dartmouth when Prince Philip was a cadet and the royal family went down, and that's when Princess Elizabeth fell in love with Prince Philip. Mountbatten was quite shrewd enough to see the possibilities there.
During the war years, the princess and Prince Philip exchanged the occasional letter. The prince was also invited to spend Christmas at Windsor in 1943, but it was not until 1946, when he returned from service in the Far East, that stories of a royal romance began to spread.
At a certain point during the war, certain times during the war, when he was on leave, he would come to Windsor Castle, and he certainly went to at least one of the pantomime performances. And in the meantime, in the background, there was a lot of activity on behalf of his future by a variety of different figures: his grandmother, Lady Milford Haven, Lord Louis Mountbatten, his very ambitious uncle, indeed to some extent Princess Marina, and one or two others who discussed amongst themselves the interesting thought that perhaps one day he might marry Princess Elizabeth.
Philip may have been a prince and related to the princess several times over. They are both great-great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria, but their early lives differed wildly. Prince Philip was a refugee. His family had been forced to leave Greece in the early 1920s after the Revolutionary Court had passed a death sentence on his father, Prince Andrew. His family split up. His sisters married and settled in Germany, and in 1934, when he was 13, Philip was sent to school in Scotland. It was around this time that Lord Mountbatten began to take special notice of him.
Prince Philip had had a rather lonely, very lonely and difficult childhood from the age of about 8, I think, when his mother had a sort of nervous breakdown. His father wasn't on the scene at all. And so, especially his two uncles, my father and my father's older brother, George, the Marquis of Milford Haven, played a big part in Philip's life. And he was a nice cousin that one was always very happy to see, and he would come and stay, and he would be fun, and it was just very nice having him around. My sister and I were only two girls; we had no brothers, so it was always nice to have a young man come along and liven things up.
Above the ancient abbey of Ramsey, Lord Mountbatten's standard flies in token of a joyful event, the wedding of his elder daughter Patricia to Captain Lord Brabourne of the Coldstream Guards.
When Patricia Mountbatten married Lord Brabourne in October 1946, Prince Philip was an usher. For a public not yet familiar with the prince, the newsreel commentator helpfully pointed him out.
At the abbey door came a greeting from Prince Philip of Greece, who was kept very busy acting as an usher. Prince Philip stands on the right.
Princess Elizabeth, together with Princess Margaret, was a bridesmaid. It was their encounter at the door of Romsey Abbey with the Greek prince that caught the attention of society watchers and gossip columnists.
Accompanied by Prince Philip, the royal party arrives at the abbey door, where more greetings were to follow at this happy family gathering. The Queen looked radiant in a pale French grey coat and frock, with 2 platinum foxes and a grey ostrich feather hat. The 2 princesses were given a helping hand with their coats before beginning their part in the service.
My wedding came in 1946, the year after the war ended, and it was the first occasion that the King and Queen had come, I think, out of London to a purely private family gathering. So there was a great interest in that. There was a famous picture taken at the entrance to Romsey Abbey, where we were married, when the princesses were arriving as bridesmaids, and being October, they had coats. And there's a picture of him taking the princess's coat. And I think something about that picture made people think, oh, who is this young man? And is there something behind this? I think that was the first time that he appeared in any way to be linked with the princess.
Next to appear were the bridesmaids, a charming picture in their full-skirted gowns of forget-me-not blue, the poses they carried matched by the flowers in their hair.
By all accounts, Princess Elizabeth was in love with her prince, but there were those around her who disapproved of the match.
He was very independent, he had to be, from childhood on, He wasn't in a mold or in a model of anything. He was his own person, and I think he wasn't going to be somebody who was going to absolutely toe the line without any queries at all. And also the fact that he was my father's nephew and they were very close made people a bit suspicious, because my father always had very progressive views, which is why he did so well in his careers, but not altogether something that made old-fashioned courtiers feel very comfortable with. And I think they were rather worried that too much fresh air was going to be let in.
The King and Queen, too, were unsure. King George was concerned the princess was too young to marry, and the Queen's brother was lobbying hard against the refugee prince.
Lord Mountbatten and the Queen Mother did not get on at all. They didn't like each other, and she also had the rather sort of pernicious influence of her brother David Beausoleil, who was a sort of court intriguer, probably not very bright, but certainly causing a lot of trouble. And he would have been one of the figures who would have been stirring things up. And then there were other people, I think Lord Salisbury to some extent, and certainly Lord Eldon, these sort of rather patrician figures in the background. They all made it very difficult for him.
I'd like to say how very pleased I am that I've been persuaded to become patron of the London Federation of Boys' Clubs.
Prince Philip's uncle, though, proved a powerful advocate. Lord Mountbatten worked behind the scenes to increase Philip's public profile, and, mindful that Philip's nationality could stand in the way of his marriage prospects, Mountbatten lobbied hard for his naturalisation. The campaign paid off, and in March 1947, having renounced his royal titles, Philip gained British nationality and elected to be known by his naval rank and his uncle's surname. He was now simply Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. A month prior to his naturalisation, however, Philip and Princess Elizabeth began a 4-month enforced separation.
To welcome their Majesties comes Governor-General G.B. Van Zyl and veteran statesman Jan Christian Smuts. They, like us, will regard this first royal visit to South Africa as one of the most momentous times in the history of the British Empire. During this visit, prosperous South Africa will see the finest products of British industry. They will see and admire the gowns worn by the Queen and 2 princesses.
The princess and her sister accompanied the King and Queen on their trip to South Africa. The relationship between Princess Elizabeth and Philip was by this time common knowledge. Some had expected an engagement announcement prior to departure. Others posited the King wanted to give his daughter time to reflect.
I think it would be inevitable that any father would be concerned that his daughter seemed to be about to marry so very young, which would break up that family relationship, which sort of, to some extent, break it up. It suited him so well. And so that's one of the reasons why any engagement was postponed until after the South African visit.
If ever the princess had doubted her affections, she was now sure of them. Not long after the royal party returned from South Africa, the long-awaited engagement of Princess Elizabeth and Philip Mountbatten was announced.
In anybody's life, engagement day is a red-letter day. Princess Elizabeth and Lieutenant Mountbatten will never forget July the 10th, 1947. In the morning, they faced the world's press and photographers. The platinum ring, with its 1 large diamond and 2 smaller ones, stole the picture.
Now her fiancé, Philip undertook his first royal engagement.
And forerunner of many hundreds of similar activities still to come, Lieutenant Mountbatten appeared at a semi-official function with the parents and family of his bride-to-be. While the royal family entertained their personal guests in the grounds, many others kept patient vigil outside. Pathé waited with the film industry's biggest lens trained on the palace balcony. Late in the evening, after cloud and showers, this was the record it gave of a great day in a history-making romance. On the balcony, the heiress to the throne and her future husband met the British people. The king looking particularly happy, the Queen and Princess Margaret joined the young couple.
Whatever the misgivings among the ruling classes about the match, the young and clearly happy couple struck a popular chord with ordinary people, including, in Philip's case, his former neighbours.
While Princess Elizabeth and Lieutenant Philip were celebrating in the palace, it was a big day too in the Methuen Arms, village pub in Corsham, Wiltshire. Lieutenant Mountbatten was stationed there until the day before his engagement was announced. All the locals knew him, and our reporter learned how much they admired him.
You must have known him very well, Joe.
Well, I found him a most charming fellow, and he was especially fond of the game of skittles and coming here to the Methuen Arms.
Was he a good player?
He was a jolly good player, and I can't, we've had many a tussle, I can't say which was the best of the two.
Well, who beat who the most?
I wouldn't like to say.
Hello, Mr. Foreman. You saw a lot of Lieutenant Mountbatten. How do you feel about the engagement?
Yes, I met the gentleman, highly delighted to hear about it. And his health and happiness to both, sir. Cheery.
What about that? Was that good, Philip Mountbatten?
No, sir, it wasn't even a fine player, the Prince, was he, Harold? It was a very pleasant evening we had. And we were here for about 3 to 4 weeks before we knew he was the Prince. And we should very much like him here tonight with us. We had some very enjoyable evenings.
You're very, very pleased about the news of the engagement?
Very pleased indeed, yes. We shake hands with ourselves.
Well, here's jolly good luck to them both.
I think that the public liked him, but for all the same reasons that he was, so good looking and handsome, and he had a good war record. He was obviously a good chap. He was still serving in the Navy, and of course he was hoping very much to continue doing that.
No longer anonymous, now Philip's every move attracted attention.
With the King's formal consent given to the royal marriage and the date fixed for November the 20th, Lieutenant Mountbatten returns to the Naval Training Centre at Corsham, where he's an instructor at the Petty Officers' School.
It was a foretaste of the media scrutiny to which the rest of his life would be subjected.
PT forms an important part of the routine, together with training in the power of command. Chatting with his fellow officers in the wardroom, Lieutenant Mountbatten seems glad to be back at work again after a very happy leave.
It was the best coverage probably Prince Philip ever had, because he was this dashing wartime hero, handsome, the only boyfriend the Queen had ever had.
4 months on from their engagement, Princess Elizabeth married Philip Mountbatten.
The day is November the 20th, 1947. The time, 11 o'clock. A nation and a world watch. Once only in 1100 years of British kingship has there been such a day. An heiress presumptive to the throne marries the man of her choice. The setting is Westminster Abbey. To its west door come members of Europe's royal houses, the peers and the people. History is in the making. The eyes of the world are centred on Buckingham Palace. Into the dull November morning, 2 greys draw the Irish stagecoach. Inside, Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth and her father.
When the princess appeared, the crowd erupted in a thunder of cheering all along the processional route. Some well-wishers had been waiting for 19 hours to catch a glimpse of the bride-to-be.
For any girl, wedding day is the day of her life. As the 21-year-old princess arrived at Westminster Abbey, it was her moment too. For Elizabeth, this was of necessity something more. From this hour, a new life begins. Mingled with her private happiness is the sure knowledge that she must now enter a widening field of public duty and responsibility. And now the solemn service begins.
I think it was just, as it would be today, a marvellous looking young couple, very much in love. It was, a whole romantic story being played out in front of them. So it was something, completely different than the rather sort of ill old king. It was just real romance.
That a royal wedding should be treated as a national event was unprecedented. But for austerity Britain, the day provided a welcome relief from post-war rationing and the disappointing drabness of victory. The marriage of this young and glamorous couple symbolised hope in a nation desperate for change.
Churchill, Attlee was Prime Minister, they knew that this was a great way to raise public morale. There should be no expense spared, and people walked for days from all parts of the country to come to London to catch a glimpse of this couple. My own parents, they weren't together then, but they slept in the Mall just to see the coach, the wonderful state coach. It was glittering, and it was something they talked about for weeks before and weeks afterwards. It was a most remarkable event, and it established her popularity 6 or 7 years before she came to the throne.
In this moment, charged with great meaning, the people of Britain and the Commonwealth joined. They listened and remembered, in towns and villages, in shops, in streets, in homes.
Press coverage of the event was far greater than for King George VI's coronation 10 years earlier. The image of people huddled around radios became part of the wedding folklore.
For Elizabeth's destiny is great, so great that even the solemn splendor of this great moment could not altogether overshadow it. She who may one day rule over Britain and the Empire shares this heritage with her husband. The organ sounded, and for this hour, Elizabeth is not only a queen-to-be, but a bride. And now they are man and wife. The princess had been in the abbey for nearly an hour. What followed the service was the ornate pageantry of a state occasion. It showed that this was no ordinary wedding, but that of a king's daughter. Following the bridal procession came the bride's father and mother, and behind them 5 kings, 5 queens, and 8 princes and princesses.
The 2,000-strong guest list included the largest gathering of royalty, regnant and exiled anyone could remember. Princess Margaret would later recall, "It was a tremendous meeting place. People who had been starving in little garrets all over Europe suddenly reappeared."
The royal heads of state from across Europe flocked to London, and of course they took precedence in the Abbey for the wedding, which meant, I'm afraid, some of our MPs who thought they ought to take precedence, don't they always, had to ballot for places, and there were quite a lot of them who were very disappointed. But the fact that their other princesses and kings and queens were in the congregation underlined her importance as the woman who would one day be the Queen.
Outside the Abbey, the great crowd waited eagerly. There was a roar of excitement as the princess, aided by her husband, appeared and stepped into the glass coach for the drive back to the palace. It was the signal for the most heartfelt outburst of affection that Britain has seen since the bride's parents led the coronation parade. The joy of princess and people was now complete. For both, the day had been an ordeal, frightening in its intensity, yet unforgettable in its splendor. And now the tension was lifting.
They were both very good looking, very glamorous, very much in love. And I think we forget now that such a time has passed, but it was very much like Prince Charles and Diana married. You know, it was very much a fairy tale marriage.
100,000 people surged forward in a solid mass. They wanted Elizabeth. They wanted Philip.
When later Princess Elizabeth and the newly ennobled Duke of Edinburgh appeared on the palace balcony, the crowds could hardly contain their excitement.
From the palace balcony, Elizabeth and her husband waved to the cheering crowds. Seldom has a bride and groom received such a tumultuous expression of goodwill. Inside the palace, the cameras were able to capture the exquisite workmanship of the bridal gown. Princess Margaret leads the 8 bridesmaids who have come to join the bridal pair. And now, with the King and Queen to complete the family group, here are 3 generations of Europe's royal houses. As the great day drew to a close, there was the final drive across Westminster Bridge to Waterloo Station before the princess and her husband could gain the quiet that was rightfully theirs. In the princess, the nation has found all the qualities which merit the confidence of a people who have faith in the crown and its rigid observance of public duty. That is the tradition which Elizabeth will follow. And when the time comes for her to assume her responsibilities, by her side will be a husband whose counsel will merge with her own for the good of the realm.
The couple, together with the princess's corgi, Susan, would spend the first part of their honeymoon at Broadlands in Hampshire, the home of the Duke's uncle, Lord Mountbatten.
I think my father and mother were delighted when the young couple decided that they would like to accept the offer of Broadlands for the first few days of the honeymoon, which meant that they were in a place that they both knew well, which was secluded from the public, and where they could just relax after this big wedding.
Ramsey Abbey, on the first Sunday after the royal wedding, made a big contrast to Westminster, except of course for the phenomenal crowds. 10,000 visitors had arrived from miles around to greet the Princess and the Duke of Edinburgh as they arrived at the Abbey for morning service.
Any hope the couple had of escaping national attention was quickly dashed when news of their whereabouts became public.
Many spectators, trying to catch a glimpse through the windows, saw that the royal couple were not occupying the official Mountbatten pew, but at their own request were sitting with the rest of the congregation. Leaving the Abbey, the Princess and her husband received yet another great ovation as they made their way to the waiting car.
The public hunger, raised to fever pitch in the months preceding the wedding, could not simply be switched off. The couple obliged by letting the cameras join them at Broadlands.
Back at Broadlands, where the first part of the honeymoon is being spent, the royal couple returned again to the peace and quiet of Earl Mountbatten's beautiful country estate. Here, the Princess and the Duke were seen in their happiest mood as they strolled about the lawns. The Princess was wearing the blue going-away suit in which she left London. A good opportunity for a glance at some of the masses of wedding day pictures. So, the royal couple enjoy the charm of Broadlands in the autumn sunshine, a joyful echo of a wedding day which brightened the world.
For the people of Britain, it was as if the happiness of the princess was intimately bound up with their own, and with their hopes and dreams for the future. Following their marriage, the first issue facing Princess Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh was where to live. They'd chosen Sunning Hill Park in Surrey as their future country home, but in the previous August, the property was gutted by fire. In London, the couple lived at Buckingham Palace. They were expected to move to Clarence House, but the property had been badly bombed during the war and needed renovating. As a consequence, Princess Elizabeth and the Duke were forced to share their early months of marriage with her parents, the King and Queen.
At Buckingham Palace, which for 62 years has seen no royal birth, His Royal Highness the baby is born behind these windows.
Within a year of their wedding, Princess Elizabeth gave birth to a son. Prince Charles was born at Buckingham Palace on the 14th of November, 1948. The following summer, they moved into Clarence House. For a short period, the princess, her husband and their infant son were able to live a relatively normal life, a single unit under one roof.
Funnily enough, it was Prince Philip who really ran the house. I mean, the Queen, right, chose the food and menus, but Prince Philip just loved doing things like going to the Ideal Home exhibition, ordering the latest gadget for the kitchen, this sort of thing. He really, it was his first home, in many ways, where he was in charge. And I think they were very happy there.
The arrangement was soon upset when the Duke resumed his naval career, this time as leader of the first destroyer flotilla of the Mediterranean fleet, based in Malta.
For the Duke, who was still in the Navy, it was good for him. He had come through the war, having served in the Mediterranean and the Pacific fleets. He'd been mentioned in dispatches, and he was set for a naval career, or as long a naval career as he could have before the king died.
During the next few years, Princess Elizabeth spent long periods with her husband on the island, enjoying life as a naval wife. The Duke later described this period as part of 5 happy years of conventional married life, prior to Princess Elizabeth's accession to the throne.
The Queen had probably one of the happiest times of her life when she was in Malta as a naval officer's wife. And she sort of went and did things with other young wives, and they watched polo, and they went out and they went on picnics, and they went out in boats, and Prince Philip went water skiing. And of course she didn't have Prince Charles with her. He was left with Granny, who loved it, and his nanny and the nursemaids and the whole paraphernalia. And the Queen went off to join her husband, because that's what people did then.
In August 1950, Princess Elizabeth gave birth to their second child, Princess Anne, this time at Clarence House.
A charming picture taken after the ceremony shows Princess Elizabeth with her baby and the godparents, all relatives, the Queen, Earl Mountbatten and Princess Alice standing proxy for Princess Andrew of Greece, the baby's grandmother.
The following month, the Duke was promoted to Lieutenant Commander and given command of the frigate HMS Magpie.
And there was no disguising his obvious pleasure at being back amongst his former shipmates.
His prospects of promotion to high rank within the Navy looked promising, but in less than a year, his career was cut short. The King's health had been in decline for some time.
Sandringham, home of the British monarchy for nearly a century, again claims the nation's interest. To this quiet Norfolk retreat, King George comes to complete his convalescence.
His daughter, Princess Elizabeth, had increasingly to stand in for her father at state and ceremonial occasions, including in 1951 representing the King at the annual military parade marking the sovereign's official birthday, trooping the colour.
Riding Winston, the famous police horse, the princess wears a scarlet grenadier's tunic and the tricorn hat of a colonel of the regiment of 1743.
By now, the Duke had accepted his fate. He knew he could no longer combine his naval career with that of his supporting role as husband of the heiress presumptive.
After a touching ceremony of remembrance, the Princess and the Duke walked side by side up to the monument to place their own token to Canada's glorious dead.
His naval career was already somewhat curtailed before the death of the king, but I suppose had the king got better, he would have been able to continue a bit longer, but to have all that taken away from him at a stroke must have been very depressing.
In February 1952, King George VI died. He was 56. His premature death thrust his daughter Princess Elizabeth to the throne. She was 25.
Our king is no more with us. It was in Kenya, at the Royal Hunting Lodge, that the news of the king's death reached his daughter. When she returned from a night in the forests, it was to learn that she is now the queen, acceding to her father's throne immediately. There is no break in the continuity of the British monarchy.
For the new queen and her husband, their conventional private life was over.
It obviously came much quicker than she expected, but she would just have accepted that this had happened rather earlier than probably they would have liked, I'm quite sure. If they could have had another 5 or 10 years, it would have been a very happy time for them, but they made the best of it and continued their lives.
The Queen has handed over her sceptre and rod in order to acknowledge the homage, first of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Next, the Duke of Edinburgh, preceding the other royal dukes and the assembled peers.
At the Queen's coronation, the Duke was not crowned king, but as consort he paid homage to the monarch, pledging to become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship, and faith and truth I will bear unto you, to live and die against all manner of folks. So help me God.
Well, the Duke of Edinburgh was the first. He went up and knelt before her and swore his allegiance to her. And that, you know, he was so good looking. I mean, we were all madly in love with the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip as he was called then. And we just thought he was absolutely marvellous. So we just thought that that moment looked great, you know.
So began the new Elizabethan age. For the Queen, her life would now follow the fixed routine of the royal year, interspersed with state visits and foreign tours. For the Duke, his first task was to support his wife. His second, to carve out a role for himself.
He was always there to support the Queen in whatever role she was acting at the time. And he was a tremendous support. He took on a lot of supervision of what was actually happening in the household. He modernized it, which again is not very comfortable for people to be modernized, but I think he made it all simpler and better.
While the Queen eclipsed her husband in the public sphere, in private the Duke remained head of the family and was an active parent. But the lack of a clearly defined constitutional role meant he had effectively to reinvent himself.
He is a pragmatist, and therefore he very quickly worked out a new role for himself, which was obviously to support the Queen in whatever way he was needed. But on such occasions as he wasn't needed, he was able to use his new experiences in order to pursue all sorts of things of his own initiative.
In October 1956, the Duke of Edinburgh struck out on his own and embarked on a world tour. The trip took in Australia and New Zealand, as well as an excursion to the Antarctic and the Falklands.
During this 36,000-mile tour, the Duke journeyed to desolate Antarctic wastes, where men dedicated to the search for scientific knowledge share a lonely existence with the local inhabitants.
It was the duration of the tour, however, which set tongues wagging. The Duke was away for 4 months, and rumours began to circulate of a supposed rift in the royal marriage.
I think they were certainly prompted by the fact he went off for such a long time on his own. Whether there was any real truth in it, I don't know. I think he probably really wanted to get away from Buckingham Palace.
If the public expected the Duke to receive a frosty reception on his return, they were mistaken. On the 22nd of February, the day after his arrival back, it was announced that in future the Duke would be known as Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, in recognition of the affection in which he was held and his services to the nation.
Ordinarily, he doesn't care much about that kind of thing, but I suppose he liked it because it was a real gesture from the Queen. I think it was a sort of making up for some of the humiliations he'd been through.
And his first public comment on the tour he has just completed.
I find it rather difficult to realize that I've been round the world and covered nearly 40,000 miles since the 15th of October last year. Now, it'd be quite easy to claim that this was all part of some deep-laid scheme. But I'm afraid I have to admit that it all came about because I was asked to start off the Olympic Games in Melbourne. where I made, if I may say so, the best speech of my life, which is exactly 5 words.
In a speech to the City of London that same month, the Duke also took the opportunity to further extinguish rumours of a marital rift.
On Saturday, the 16th of February, 4 months almost to the day after I left home, the Queen flew out to Portugal, and we enjoyed 2 days there together before paying a state visit to that country. And then followed 3 hectic but wonderful days when the friendliness and the enthusiasm of the Portuguese people knew no bounds. And then, as you know, this adventure ended where it began, at London Airport, with a very happy family reunion.
The Queen and Prince Philip settled back down to royal and family life. To outsiders, it appeared the marriage was developing into a strong and supportive one, allowing them to enjoy time together as well as apart.
They have this relationship that she is head of state, but he's head of the family. She runs the country in loose terms. He runs the estates. So, but he is there to offer advice. He has no constitutional role, and nor should he necessarily, because he's not king. But he is there, and he is there supporting her, and she can bounce things off him.
Any remaining whisperings about a marital rift were finally quashed when the Queen gave birth to her 3rd child, Prince Andrew, in February 1960. 4 years later, in March 1964, Prince Edward was born, and the family was complete. At the time of their silver wedding anniversary in 1972, the celebrations focused on the theme of marriage and family. Prince Charles and Princess Anne had yet to marry, and the younger princes were not yet in their teens. They were a family unsullied by dissension and divorce.
In 1972, public perception of the royal family was entirely different. It was still, if you like, a form of age of deference. They were seen as role models. People used to talk about, would you like to be a prince? Would you like to be a princess? I'm called Andrew, similar in age to Prince Andrew. My mother used to say, oh, would you like to have been Prince Andrew? And in those days, it was a noble ambition to be a member of the royal family because they were seen as such gods.
By the time of their golden wedding anniversary, 25 years later, the perfect family image had been shattered. 3 of their children were divorced, 1 unmarried, and worst of all, their former daughter-in-law, Princess Diana, had died in a car accident only 3 months earlier. What could have been an embarrassment, however, proved the opposite.
Across the road from the Abbey, it was a chance for those who, on a chilly day with the constant threat of rain, wanted to offer congratulations in person.
It marked the start of a tentative recovery for the family monarchy, and a celebration of a marriage that had endured for better and for worse. Later, at a lunch at the banqueting house, hosted by Prime Minister Tony Blair, the Queen acknowledged the strength she and her husband drew from public support.
This has given us strength, most recently during the sad days after the tragedy of Diana's death. It is you, if I may now speak to all of you directly, who have seen us through and helped us to make our duty fun. We are deeply grateful to you, each and every one.
The Queen then paid her own personal tribute to her husband.
All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. Frequently, we have discussed my intended speech beforehand, and as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright manner. He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
It was a commemoration of survival. The Sunday Telegraph described the Queen and the Duke as joint pillars, sustaining their family during a period of post-traumatic recovery.
I think it must have been extremely difficult for them. I mean, in a way, my husband and I were in the same situation with some of our children's marriages, and I know that it's a double sadness, first of all for the young couple who you are very fond of, and secondly for yourselves, because it's very sad to watch children who you have brought up from scratch, from babyhood, and who appear to be starting off on a happy life when things go wrong.
10 years on, in November 2007, the Queen and the Duke reached another milestone, their diamond wedding celebrating 60 years of marriage. By this time, the royal family had rehabilitated itself. The domestic lives of the couple's 4 children had ceased to make prurient headlines, and they themselves had regained not just the respect, but the genuine affection of the nation. In a service of thanksgiving at Westminster Abbey, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Right Reverend Dr. Rowan Williams, praised their 60-year union as a faithful and creative personal partnership that secures the trust, love, and prayerful support of millions.
Prince Philip is the only man who can treat the Queen as if she was a normal woman. Nobody else can. And after all, the Queen's position is a very, very lonely one. And so her husband is really the only person who can be close to her and who can support her in a particular way that nobody else could.
On the actual day of their anniversary, and in an echo of the past, the Queen and the Duke flew to Malta, the setting for 2 relatively carefree years in the early part of their marriage.
The Queen and the Duke certainly do seem particularly at ease here. It was the Duke himself who decided that they should spend the actual day of their anniversary on Malta for this very private of public couples. Quite a romantic gesture. The aim of royal reporting is to get up close to those you're talking about, but it's not often that it's that close. But this was a particularly informal trip. No official banquets or engagements. In fact, although he looked bemused at my talk of romantic gestures, when they left here, the Duke was taking the Queen out for dinner à deux. Romilly Weeks, ITV News in Malta.
It was really interesting, the Queen and Prince Philip in Malta, because they were particularly relaxed. They'd had the whole diamond wedding celebrations here, which had been a huge event. Television cameras, lots and lots of people. In Malta, it was almost a private trip, and it's a place that they have huge affection for. It's a place that the Queen once said that she felt the most normal, where she was allowed to go swimming and drive and go shopping in the very early days of their marriage. So they were particularly relaxed and happy, I think.
After the official celebrations, their trip to Malta and the opportunity it offered the couple to revisit happy times confirmed the deep bond and enduring love that has sustained them through good times and bad. Theirs is, quite simply, a lifelong romance.
I think they're an example of a wonderful marriage that has stuck together through thick and thin and has really never faltered.